Okay, so it's a kind of revisiting of something I did, well, another talk 10 years ago, which is rather surprising. So I have to press this button, apparently. There we go. Okay, so dialect labeling is one of the main things I'm going to talk about all the way through today. But I'll be adding new things here and there, new perspectives and so on, and also updating the data. So, okay, here's some labels, and I think you recognise all of these. Mackham, Sunderland, yeah. Doric, Aberdeen, specifically, yes. So those are all sort of well established in our sort of public consciousness, shall we say. But these labels have different origins and different histories. They don't all come from the same place. I mean, Mackham is fairly recent. Probably the oldest of these is Cockney, which goes back to the Middle Ages. I don't know about the other ones so much. So, okay, they have different origins, different histories. They have positive or negative connotations, but this depends on context. Mostly it's negative, as we'll find out, but there are positive examples as well, and I'll comment on those as we go by. These labels usually refer to the working class accent or dialect of a place, or the rural inhabitants of a place. So that's something also worth bearing in mind. So I think you'll agree I mean, a linguist would say I speak a dialect because we all speak dialect, but I don't speak dialect in the sort of sense that ordinary people would consider that word. Okay, so labelling a dialect has the crucial effect of making it real in some speakers' minds, in everybody's minds. So for instance, you can hear he talks Broad Yorkshire or Broad Lancashire, possibly Broad Derbyshire. I don't know if that's a concept. Do we have anybody from Derbyshire and sort of East Midlands? You know, whether Derbyshire is a concept. Interestingly, Yorkshire is a concept, but you don't sort of say he speaks Broad Leeds or Broad York. Interesting. That's for another talk. So we as linguists are perfectly aware of the variation that exists. So, for instance, variation within each country, or the county rather. We're also aware that there isn't a linguistic boundary where there's a political boundary. Usually that's the case. I think the exception in this country is between England and Scotland, where the dialect distinction is fairly sharp. There's also variation according to age and social class. The general idea is that younger people speak less dialect than older people, though you can, in the north of England, that may not be true. But I want to talk about social churn, okay? People moving around. So, in a sense, the antithesis of a dialect. So what happens when demographic changes lead to a new dialect? Well, the best known new town of Britain is Milton Keynes, which is still the largest new town, I think, and most recent, and although there will be some new ones to join it. So we did a study 30-something years ago of that. So this was migration, sort of introduction to migration and dialect, if you like. But there are also new social groupings coming up. So immigration from other parts of the same country or from other countries, and then this concept of ethnolect. So this is then a variety of language that's characteristic of, shall we say, in this context, British Asians in Bradford. Okay, there's a particular accent of English that distinguishes them. I'm not really going to be talking today about what's known as the heritage languages, although the heritage languages do play a major part in this kind of mixing that I'm going to be talking about. So then, as part of the mixing, another way of looking at it is what happens when you have a great many languages coming together, and then you maybe get new ways of speaking among young people. So inner city London is what we'll be talking about, but also Birmingham and Manchester, and possibly other cities as well. But we'll be focusing on, as I said, ethnically highly diverse parts of London. So what's the language like there today? So what's the English language like there today? Is it a new dialect, or is it something else? Is it like a sort of broad collection of dialects and accents? And then, relevant to today's talk, how did the British media receive it, or them, depending on how you view it? and how is it talked about now, 20 odd years later. So anyway, so what's happening in London? Okay, Multicultural London English is the name of the variety that we've been studying for 20 plus years. It's one of a series of new, youthful, urban ways of speaking in northwestern Europe. So these are multicultural, multi-ethnic and multilingual districts of large cities of northwestern Europe. Why northwestern Europe? That's another question for another time. But there have been studies in Copenhagen, Stockholm, Oslo, Berlin, Amsterdam, places in Belgium, other cities, Gothenburg and so on. But it's all Northwest Europe, right? And not, for instance, Paris. There have been studies in Paris, but coming out with different results. That's another question which I can't begin to answer today, or ever actually, for that matter. So these varieties are known as multi-ethnolects. Now, a multi-ethnolects is a mixed variety shared among different groups, usually in contexts of immigration and multilingualism. So the variety is the variety of the host language, not of the immigrant languages. And this multi-ethnolects is, almost by definition, also shared by the existing indigenous population as well. So what about Multicultural London English? What is it? What is its essence, if you like, if you want to look at that? One thing is that, okay, in London's Cockney, as you know, and in Yorkshire as well, for that matter, initial H is generally not pronounced, so ama, aus. But in MLE, H is very much reinstated in these words, so very low rates of, in our studies, very low rates of H dropping. Among older people, it's much higher, and among non-MLE speakers in London, it's also much higher. Okay, so another pronunciation feature, TH stopping. So, for instance, initial V, the voiced TH sound may be pronounced with a D, so you get der, de, den, dem. Also, as in Cockney, and this is something shared with Cockney, the voiceless th may be pronounced F. Okay, so that thin path and thought come out as fin path and thought. So far, no surprise. But in MLE, a small set of voiceless TH words may be pronounced with T. So ting, something, ute, and a handful of other words. Just those words, very specifically. And not, for instance, thin coming out as tin. That would sound Irish, which I think is not the case here. Grammatical changes, well, I'll just mention one. Preposition dropping. So I used to go Lambeth instead of I used to go to Lambeth. Okay, the preposition is dropped. This is something that has spread quite rapidly right across the country. And is this known to you? Yes, you're where you come from in North England, mostly, I guess. It's there, right? Another sort of centre of gravity of that is in the Liverpool-Manchester area, in between Liverpool and Manchester. It's also very common. Quite. Stoke-on-Trent, yeah, right. So that's the same general area, but not in Manchester itself, I don't think. I know, looking at Mancunian over here. Do you get it in Manchester? Not as much. Not as much, yeah, and not in. Anyway, then one could go on, but let's move on. But it's certainly spreading, and it's been shown that one of the mechanisms of its spread is social media. So Twitter, the original study of what used to be called Twitter, showed that it's actually spreading from London outwards, northwards. Okay, here's a recorded example. Now, here we have a grammatical feature, a new pronoun man, and then three pronunciation features. So near monophthongal pronunciations of goat and face vowels, and a monophthongal price vowel. Okay, so here's a young man, I can't remember his name, but anyway, this is how he sounds. So just listen to the highlighted words there.
I don't really mind how my girl looks. If she looks decent, yeah, and there's one bit of her face that just looks a mess, yeah, I don't care. It's a personality man's looking at. I'm not even looking at the girl proper like.
Right then, so interesting. The first talk today, or second talk today, was about transcription. Okay, so the don't comes out as don't. Face, as it would be in London, comes out as face. And like, as it would be in London, comes out as lack. And then you have the pronoun man as well, which in this case means I, first person pronoun. Familiar to you from your schools, man? I would expect not, actually. Right, moving on. Okay, some web resources for MLE. I'm not going to play any more of this, but there's an English language teaching resources archive, formerly at Queen Mary University of London, but there's the current URL for it. It has lots of examples of this from our earlier projects. And then there's a white MC called Potter Paper, and in this particular recording, which was quite some years ago now, he uses MLE for his rap. And here are two more. So these are actually MCs as well, Big Zoo and Morrison. And you can find links to this in these slides when they get put on the web. Anyway, who speaks MLE and when? So MLE occupies a continuum, and it's from a vernacular variety to a youth style. And this is how this works. Okay, so what's a vernacular, first of all? Well, we think of vernacular as a local dialect or accent, something that's not standardized. You won't find a formal dictionary of it. You would find dictionaries of how to talk Yorkshire or whatever it is, Lancashire, but that's not standardized. And that's one thing, so it's associated with a place, so it's a dialect. And a vernacular is also the language we grew up with, and that we use when we pay the least attention and when we're at our most relaxed. Okay, this is Lebov's idea. I think the way of looking at, there are more sort of psycholinguistic ways of looking at this as well, and that is looking at first language acquisition, also looking at language attrition, the loss of your first language. And I think it's the case, and I probably don't know, I'm talking out of turn here, but I think it's the case that if you learn a language in sort of later childhood, you're quite likely to lose it if you move out of the environment. But your first language, you keep it even if you forget it. It's still there latently and can be revived quite easily. Okay, so that is the vernacular, this thing that can be lost, but it can be brought back again. So it's, in a sense, hardwired. Now, how does this relate to Multicultural London English? Well, it's a vernacular in the dialect sense, and I'll come back to that, but it's also a vernacular in the language we grew up with sense for very many people. Okay, and it's usually people who have sort of working class backgrounds who speak this just as non-standard dialects are generally spoken by working class people. Minority ethnic speakers use it more strongly, but it's not confined to them. So ethnicity plays a part as well, but not necessarily decisively. Elements of MLE, especially vocabulary, are available to other speakers as part of a style. So you hear things like wagwan. Do you hear that in your schools? Yes. What about their ends? Do they live in their ends? Yes. Right, okay. These are easily borrowed, okay? Transferred hundreds of miles. Well outside of the MLE range, if you like. Now, what kind of labels are there for these multi-ethnic youth languages? I'm now just moving back into Europe briefly here. There are pejorative terms invented or at least propagated by the media. So we get in Germany Kanakspach, which is a term of abuse. The Kanak portion of it is apparently. But I also read that the term has been reclaimed by speakers, just like terms like gay or queer have been reclaimed. And then in the Netherlands we have Smurfentaal, which means basically Smurf language. I don't know whether that's a negative thing or what, but it sort of makes it seem little and small and silly. Jafaican then is a term in London, which many of you will have come across. Academics' terms attempt to be neutral non-offensive, and also possibly incorporating local usage. So in Berlin, we get Kiezdeutsch, which means hood or neighborhood German. And then in the Netherlands, we have Straattaal, which means simply street language. And in London, Multicultural London English, which was our invention some years ago. But in London, there isn't a particular term for MLE that everybody uses. They, if you ask them what is this kind of language you speak, well, they say, well, it's slang, I suppose. And that's about as close as they can get. Now then, newspapers. So this is the original study that I did a long time ago now. Okay, tracing multicultural London English in the newspapers. So this is the article, and this is a way of accessing it from our website. What I did was to go to a database called Nexus, and this is something that's accessible through universities. I'm not sure, maybe you have to pay for it if you're not at university, I don't know. But in July 2012, I searched for the terms Jafaican, with two different spellings, and Multicultural London English in. And then I thought, in? Why did it say? I must have deleted something there. Anyway, in this database, in the newspapers. And I found 62 articles which contained at least one occurrence of Jafaican, and 29 which contained the term Multicultural London English, of which 20 also contained Jafaican. Okay, what did these articles say? So these are some of the discourses, if you like, that came up through that search. So here's what the Evening Standard said. So this is really pretty much the first occurrence or any comment on this in a British newspaper. The Cockney accent is being pushed out of its heartland by a new kind of speech. Playgrounds and housing estates of London are alive with the sound of an accent that sounds Jamaican with flavours from West Africa and India. The Standard can reveal that this new English variety is replacing Cockney in inner London, as more white children adopt the speech patterns and vocabulary of their black neighbours and classmates. Teachers have dubbed the phenomenon Jafaican, and TV's Ali G would understand it perfectly. Now, I object to this idea that teachers dubbed it Jafaican. They didn't. It came out of nowhere. Well, it didn't kind of come out of nowhere, but the term Jafaican existed prior to this, meaning fake Jamaican. So you can be fake Jamaican by having dreadlocks, being white and having dreadlocks, for instance. That would count as Jafaican. So not a linguistic thing. Well, Ali G was a phenomenon back at that time. So anyway, Jafaican is the term that came up. But notice there's nothing sort of particularly negative here. Okay, it is Cockney accent is being pushed out of its heartland. So I suppose that is the idea of displacement. That's the metaphor here. And then I think it's just the same issue. Yeah, it's the very same issue of the Evening Standard comes up with a list of words that you need to know. Crepes, yard, ute, blood, brethren, bruv, ends, and low batties, okay? So these are terms that we need to know if we want to understand young people. And in fact, they are almost all Jamaican in origin, not all. Okay, so Daily Telegraph then chimes in a little bit later on. Jafaican as contemporary, classless, modern, stylish. Here's the Telegraph trying to be all of those things. It's significant that the message board of the new Englishness is MySpace, the social networking website that somehow flattens out the traditional nuances of class differentiation. It's there too in the magpie lexicon from which the lyrics are drawn, with many of them delivered in the fertile hybrid of Cockney, the Queen's English, and pretend Jamaican. What's it called? Jafaican? That is the lingua franca of young southern England. So there you go. So moving on, Jafaican and people in the know, back to the Evening Standard, a few years later now. So this is a humorous quiz. How did Nang, Greasy, and Butters triumph in 2010? A. They are the producers who work on the X Factor winners' recordings. B. They are the stars of a new CBeebies show. C. They are street or Jafaican expressions which have overtaken Cockney slang terms. Or D. They are ingredients popularised by Delia Smith in her last Waitrose promotion. And then moving on to something a bit more serious, perhaps, or even contemporary. British National Party, as was, and apparently it's been reconstituted recently, said, Cockneys have become first British group to be ethnically cleansed. The Cockney culture and language has been ethnically cleansed from London's East End as mass third world immigration has pushed white people into minority status and destroyed the world-famous accent. So that's what they said. That was the URL for it. It doesn't, well, it does, nothing happens if you click on that, but well, they have a new website now. But that was about, I don't know, 15 years ago, perhaps. So then you have David Starkey, the historian, his views on Jamaican or Jafaican and the riots of 2011. And then we could pose the question, just how wrong could he be? So this is then a TED talk that I did at the time, although that was unrelated to those riots. I was already been invited to give this talk in relation to the East End of London and language. And then the riots came, so that gave me a hook to hang my talk on. Anyway, it's there. This then is a still from Newsnight, just before, a couple of weeks before, in which David Starkey said the following. The whites have become black. A particular sort of violent, destructive, nihilistic gangster culture has become the fashion, and black and white, boy and girl, operate in this language together. This language which is wholly false, which is this Jamaican patois that's been intruded in England. And that's why so many of us have this sense of literally a foreign country. Okay, so do a very quick critique of that. There's a double mistake on Starkey's part here, deliberate or not, I don't know. Firstly, he's hearing what he considers to be Jamaican, when actually he's hearing MLE. And this is a wrong attribution of foreignness, because it is very much British. It's in London. It took place in London. It doesn't, to the extent that it exists elsewhere, it exists in places like Manchester and Birmingham, in different variants. So it's not intruded, in that they use his word. Secondly, he ascribes a violent disposition directly to the language, which of course is something that is very hard to do, to see the logic of. You can see a kind of logic here, but that's what's false, I'd say. Okay, the next incident 3 years later, media incident, was Jihadi John. US journalist James Foley's killer is heard speaking with a British accent. And this is Jihadi John, who then it was revealed that he was a man called Mohammed Emwazi, who arrived in the UK from Kuwait at the age of 6. And linguists, myself included, we were widely interviewed by various media organisations and confirmed that the jihadist in the video was a speaker of Multicultural London English. And then the term Multicultural London English appears quite a number of times on the internet closely associated with the jihadist, and I checked that, those are still there. But interestingly, from this point onwards, the term Jafaican is used much less in newspapers and journalism generally, but it's still used, I think Salina will confirm this, in various web forums and discussion groups, the term Jafaican. Okay, so that was 2014. What did the press do next? We're now coming after the period of my original study. Okay, the press largely switched, as I said, from referring to Multicultural London English in place of Jafaican. And here's a diagram kindly provided by my colleague George over there. And this tells us that between April 2006, which is when the Evening Standard got going, to July 2012, So that was the period. Those are the figures that I counted. You had more Jafaican than MLE, Multicultural London English. After that, up until the near present, we have an overwhelming preponderance of Multicultural London English, and a lot more occurrences generally of references generally to this way of speaking. Okay, so what did the press do next after that? Now then, Wagwan with our beautiful language was a headline and a picture of a building I'm sure none of you recognize. I certainly didn't. So this is actually the Faculty of Linguistics at Oxford University, which as you'll see. The Daily Mail, 2022. Experts at Oxford University believe Multicultural London English, MLE, a dialect that emerged in the 1980s among Jamaican immigrants, is set to become far more common. Pictured as the Faculty of Linguistics, Philology and Phonetics at Oxford University. So then you might ask, what's it got to do with Oxford University? Well, this is what it has to do with Oxford University. So later on, Dr. Matt Hunt Gardner, who is a sociolinguist, who's now in London actually, but he was a lecturer in sociolinguistics at Oxford. He told the Mail that these words, or the words of MLE, would enrich our common tongue. And he says, well, language changes naturally, so there's nothing we can do to stop it, he added. And then the Mail comments, well, frankly, I despair. This sort of slang degrades our beautiful language. So what happened was that somehow the Daily Mail got wind of this, that there was some Multicultural London English or something like that, whatever it was. Oh, God, we need to have some column inches to fill. So let's send somebody out to investigate this. Where's a Department of Linguistics? They must have one at Oxford. Let's talk to Oxford. Oh, yeah, there's this guy called Matt Gardner, and he's willing to talk to us. And so I spoke to Matt actually just a few weeks ago, and we discussed this. And he said, well, you know, they did an interview with me, and I kept saying, it's nothing to do with me, he said. It's these other people in London and wherever. Anyway, that was ignored, and he then became the researcher for Multicultural London English. Now, I don't begrudge him that, because he did a really good interview, and you can read it, and you know, elsewhere, not in the Daily Mail, needless to say, but elsewhere. You know, he got the idea, and he was able to run with it. But it didn't stop the Daily Mail from attributing it, the origins of it, incorrectly. So that's what they did next. And then, a German linguist, Johanna Gerwin, wrote an article. She came to London a few years ago and did a year's worth of research there, among various varieties of London English, including Cockney, young and old, and MLE as well. And then she also replicated the newspaper study that I did prior to that. But she went into much greater depth than I did. So one of the things she did was to look at the words, the lexical shibboleths that were attributed to MLE in British newspapers. Meaning, what words are characteristic of MLE according to the newspaper? So this then shows the words, but you can't read those, so I did this. So you could read some of them. And it tells us that, just from reading from the top, bear, sick, ends, bruv, brud, not sure what she means by that, brethren, blood, peng, nang, creps, wasteman, yard, and low, batties, again, are the words that are most strongly associated with newspapers, with MLE in these newspapers. So one striking thing is that they are, again, mostly Caribbean in origin. And that's something I want to come back to. Right now, in fact, so MLE and the link with Black British English is what I want to talk about. And this is not a new departure, but this is something that we've been thinking about more deeply, shall we say. Okay, so as I've already said, these shibboleths are almost all Jamaican. They are not South Asian or West African, as they might have been. Jamaicans being in really quite a minority compared to South Asians and West Africans in London today. Speakers of MLE are mainly represented in another chart from Johanna Gervin's paper, presented as being black or less often Asian. Okay, so that's worth noting. But then we have black public intellectuals Efua Hirsch and Geoffrey Boitier, who clearly embed MLE in the British black diaspora, like this. Okay, so this is her, this is Hirsch. And she writes of MLE, it's a black inner city language, West Indian and South Asian, Cockney and estuary slang. Okay, so the speakers are largely black, but it has the language, it has the various composed in different ways. And this is Boitier's book, and he says, street parlance connected intimately to the black diaspora. Okay, so we're edging towards, you know, MLE as black, perceived as black. And we can continue along the same line by looking at MLE and black music genres. Now, there's a long post-Second World War history of black, especially Jamaican music and language in the UK. So starting off from the 50s with music, calypso, ska, dancehall, dub, reggae. I sound as if I know what these things are, but I don't. Well, it's not much, not as much as I should. Language, Jamaican Creole, okay, is associated with those things. And then from about 2000, we have language is MLE, music is grime. Now, grime, I expect, has been popular among young people in the north of England for a long time now. So the associations then are from basically less privileged groups, and always have been less privileged groups, and when grime emerged, that they were still less privileged groups, although many of the artists are, of course, very prominent national figures. Okay, so MLE and Black British English. Now, how does this work then? Is there a link here? An organisation called BLAM UK, this stands for Black Learning, Achievement and Mental Health, and there's the URL for that organisation there. They reject the term MLE on the grounds that BBE, Black British English, has been appropriated by non-black people, including white and Asian people. So we shouldn't say MLE. It's not multicultural. It is appropriated instead. Okay. Now that's awkward for people who are theorizing about, you know, dialect mixture, new languages, language contact, and so on, and identity. Okay, let's just see how we can work this out, okay? I mean, by this analysis, it's BBE and not MLE. That's the language of grime. And I suppose you can see some sense in this, in that the vast majority of grime artists are black, either Caribbean or West African, but not all, of course. But where does this leave MLE then? Well, it's become associated with different identities, including music, ethnicity, and style. It has strong links with black language and identity, so Black British English. But BBE and MLE are linguistically very closely related, and the divergence really is in the use of vocabulary, that people who would consider themselves speakers of BBE, number one, they are usually black, and secondly, they use a lot of Caribbean terms. But they are themselves of both Caribbean and direct African ancestry, and regardless of their diasporic ancestry, Caribbean Creole is central to them for both groups. But MLE is still a multi-ethnolect, used as a vernacular by people from a large range of linguistic, ethnic, and cultural backgrounds. Okay, what have we learned so far? Well, media labeling and media exposure make accents and dialects recognizable, and it often leads to negative evaluations, but sometimes positive ones as well. Media discourses strongly guide the way an accent or dialect is perceived socially. You could look at cause and effect there. There might be something worth thinking about. You know, is it the media that influences us or the other way around? And all this has led, whether we like it or not, to an accent or dialect enregisterment. So this is the association of an accent with real or perceived social characteristics of a particular social group. And I think you can see that in what I've just been talking about. What we've also learned, well, language attitudes may change with both individual events. And we've seen some examples of some key events that appear to have impinged on the language and also the frequency with which the language is referred to in the media. But there's a lot of stability overall. So, you know, if you ask people today which is the ugliest English accent, you get one answer. If you'd asked them 70 years ago, you get exactly the same answer. We as sociolinguists change our opinions and analyses as new information comes to light, I like to think, and also as society changes, as well as changes in the discipline, in our case, of sociolinguistics as well. And we can see this in the evolution of our analysis and our understanding of MLE over the past 20 or so years. Thanks for listening.
So I'll give you a minute to talk to each other. What do you expect the Telegraph to write about Jafaican? Okay, so for our time, I didn't give you loads. What do we have expectations going in? Positive, negative? Negative.
Destroying the language and corruption and all of that.
Yeah, something negative, destroying the language, corruption. Maybe raise hands if that's roughly what we think. Okay, overwhelmingly. This is a slight curiosity from our perspective. Do you think your students would have a sense of the Telegraph? Okay, that was just noted. Okay, so we have a few questions. There's two articles that we've put up on a media pack. They're in the lead-in tasks. So if you're already on the website, you can go through the lead-in tasks, or you can use the QR code. Have a quick read through as much as you can from the two different articles from the Telegraph about, at this point, Jafaican. And there's just a few questions. The first one is a bit on the long side, so there's a third point where we really get into the language aspect. So if you want to focus on that, that might save us some time. So I'll give you time to read those and discuss with each other kind of how is it represented? What do the authors claim? Where does it come from? What properties do they ascribe to Jafaican? And how do they kind of compare to each other? So I'll give you plenty of time to read through and discuss these questions. Okay, I hate to cut you off because I gave you quite a bit of text to read, so I appreciate there's not loads of time for that. But maybe we could just share some of our initial reactions to what you were reading. Did anything surprise you? Did anything fit your expectations? What did you think? Do you think they sounded similar? Maybe did they approach Jafaican in the same way, if you were able to read through both?
I think it's interesting how sort of sweeping, particularly the first one is in that sort of the effect of it, or the negatives, and how, you know, how catastrophic it seems it's going to be, and then sort of assigning loads of sort of negatively using efforts that viewed attitudes and stereotypes. There's just so many stereotypes launched in with this at the same time. It feels like it's kind of sweeping up lots of people together in a very unfair way.
Yeah. So it's really bringing in whole groups of people in kind of umbrella statements that cannot possibly kind of be applied to so many people. Yeah, I would say I got kind of a similar reading from these. Any other thoughts that just at least stood out? I mean, so we've got articles that are from 2011. 2011, do we think that the attitudes would be similar? Genuine question. From the Telegraph, maybe, yeah. So where we're getting this from could actually, yeah, maybe not lots has changed. So, yeah, these were quite text heavy. I'm going to move us to the next one, but this is something that you could probably stew on for quite a while in a class and really pick through the wording of where you're getting each of these ideas. We might only have time to do a quick scan through, but what we have added now is a new task that brings together an old one and a new. So we've got 2 different discussion board posts. There was the discussion board from 2011 is in the original pack, but we now have a discussion from Reddit from 2023 talking about MLE. And I think it would just be interesting to have a quick read through. How has the attitudes changed, if they have? How do they differ with those 12 years? So I'll give you a chance to look through that. Okay. I really hate to cut you off because there's so much interesting things in here, but I want to make sure there's time for questions. What were some quick takeaways just from these 2 different discussion boards?
The first one was a lot more sort of clearly negative and pulling out. And I was saying it sounded a lot more like people were being perceived that those who spoke Emily were putting it on to like play a part. Whereas in that second one, I was saying they talk about code switching, so it's like part of their identity, but something that they're conscious of. And sort of more formal settings. So it's interesting how the perception changed within those years.
Yeah, so we've got kind of a lot more outwardly negative perceptions. Yeah.
The questions that were posed at the beginning of the discussion, one was about people.
Yeah.
Think of people that use that. The second one was about employability, which took some of the heat out of the discussion because it was depersonal. It wasn't personal. Whereas the first one, just they were insulting each other right left and centre. The second one was looking at it from just a much more nuanced perspective, I suppose.
Yeah, so I think that's an excellent point to take on board is the questions were so different, which then really changes it. And I think you're right in pointing out the people versus kind of a broader concept really changing the attitude behind it. Definitely. I think I might leave it. There's a lot more I think could say about this, but I want to give you time to talk to Paul. So I'm going to leave and let him answer questions. But thank you for reading those because they're amazing.